Hey guys, welcome back. This is Neon. We're going to talk a little bit about Patreon and where Patreon is at right now and why, at least for YouTubers, Patreon really isn't necessary anymore. It's not really necessary anymore. So before we get into talking about Patreon, which we've talked about before, I just want to call to your attention that we now have a join button here on Clownfish TV on the YouTube channel. This basically acts like Patreon. This acts like Patreon for us. If you click the join button, it will give you the option to join like the Clownfish TV club here on YouTube. And we're still working on perks. We're not really sure what people would like for perks. We're going to do exclusive live streams. We're going to try to, I guess, mesh what we're doing with the Clownfish support on our website with YouTube and, see if one works better than the other. I know that, we pretty much have everybody on YouTube. That's where most of our audience is. And it might just be a case of, this works better for us. Now, we do get 75% of this. YouTube gets a 25% cut. But we can do like exclusive posts, exclusive videos, that sort of thing. Again, this really, makes Patreon completely unnecessary for YouTubers if you have access to the membership button. Right? And we're going to talk about why, some other reasons why Patreon is declining and why as a content creator, either as a YouTuber or a podcaster or an artist or whatever it is that you do, why you might want to think twice about throwing in with Patreon right now. We'll talk a little more about, how Clownfish is doing it, how we plan to do it going forward. Okay, so Patreon next week is rolling out new fees for its creators, but not for existing users. We talked about this before, that Patreon is jacking the fees. The reason we think Patreon is jacking their fees is because Patreon's CEO said the company's generous business model is not sustainable as it sees rapid growth. Actually, I've heard the opposite. I've heard that Patreon's numbers are declining and is basically trying to get as much blood out of the remaining rocks as they can because they are not necessary. They're just really not necessary at all. So really what kind of, became a tipping point for a lot of people using Patreon was the fact that their Trust in Safety Committee last year banned a user, Sargon of Akkad, who is a controversial YouTuber, banned him for things he said not on Patreon, not on his own YouTube channel, but on another YouTube channel. So this set off the warning bells, even for people who maybe don't agree with Sargon's political beliefs, right? It set off the warning bells that Patreon will basically, follow you around the internet and, follow you around and see what it is you're saying on all of your social media platforms, on other people's social media platforms, and they'll make an arbitrary decision as to whether or not you have the honor of working with Patreon. This is concerning. We're seeing more and more of this, as these types of services like this and with Kickstarter, etc., as they sort of set themselves up to be publishers. They kind of become gatekeepers in their own right. It used to be that they were basically payment processors, but now they get to determine whether or not the project or the creator is worthy of using their service. That's concerning. A lot of people left because of the Sargon situation. Again, just, even if you don't agree with Sargon or the content in his videos, it is concerning. It was concerning to us that Patreon had that kind of leeway, and their rules were very, very sort of unclear as to what constituted an infraction, what constituted, being removed from the platform. You never could get a straight answer out of them. They tried to kind of backpedal and give people more insight into how they make these decisions. But just the fact that you could build up, a business on Patreon and they could just, for any arbitrary reason, pull the rug out from underneath you and cost you, thousands of dollars a month, is cause for concern. And there were really no warnings or anything, as I understand it. So a lot of people left. A lot of people left Patreon the end of last year. People were kind of going out and doing their own thing. Now, we never really got started with Patreon, so we actually went out and kind of created our own Patreon type thing through our website. This is what people were doing before Patreon. What Patreon's doing is nothing new, nothing new at all, right? People were doing this before, just using like PayPal or Visa, MasterCard or whatever it is. So Patreon took a hit, right? And right after that, Jack Conte came out and said the generous business model is not sustainable. Now they're fishing for venture capital, right? I think they're in their 5th or 6th year online, and the venture capital is probably running out. They need to pitch themselves to other firms to get some more venture capital because it's not profitable. I mean, really, taking a cut of what artists do, and very few people on Patreon make what I would call a living wage. I think most people, it's just, if you're lucky, a couple of $100 here and there, maybe a couple of $1,000 here and there, but very few people on Patreon actually make what I would consider a decent living solely through Patreon. So they're rolling out a new pricing structure, and we did talk about this before, but here's, it's kind of like, hurry, get in on Patreon. We're going to talk about this. Almost it comes across as sort of like panic to me. Panic on Patreon's part, and how they're going out to all the tech blogs now and trying to make a case for what Patreon actually is. Because again, I don't see a purpose. I mean, everything that they do, you can do yourself through your own website. You can, YouTube is doing it themselves. Other services are letting you do it. Even Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter has something called, I don't know if they still have it or not. It's called Drip, which is basically like Patreon, and you don't really need them. They're kind of, there's no purpose to Patreon anymore. And now they're going to raise their fees. So this is coming from The Verge. Patreon's raising its fees, but not for existing users. If you're interested in starting a Patreon campaign for your art, videos, or other creative work, you should join this week. Hurry, before the crowdfunding company raises its rates. Patreon announced a new payment plan structure in March, and on May 7th, it will start charging a higher commission for access to popular features. But the new rates won't apply to anybody who's already using the platform. Patreon currently takes 5% of its users' earnings, and it has one service tier, which lets creators accept recurring payments from fans, offer different backing tiers with special perks, and link their Patreon accounts to platforms like Discord. Starting on May 7th, new users will choose between 3 options. For 5%, they'll get the bare bones Patreon Lite service without features like backing tiers. For 8%, they'll get Patreon Pro, which is effectively the current service with a few new features. So you're talking almost doubling the cut. And for 12%, with a minimum monthly cost of $300, they can get more one-on-one support with Patreon Premium. Who would pay for that? You can do all this through PayPal. You don't need them. Creators who already use Patreon will be enrolled in Patreon Pro at the old 5% rate, and they can join Patreon Premium for a 9% commission. Patreon is also changing its payment processing fees, and existing creators can opt to keep the old fee structure, although Patreon has said many people might pay lower rates under the new model. Maybe possibly. Patreon says it's gotten extensive feedback from current users. I'm sure they have, but still trying to make the change impact them as little as possible. That contrasts with a 2017 payment processing fee change, which was scrapped after users protested, and they're still protesting. Patreon, you're not doing a good job. Some existing creators still have concerns about the new tiers. Yes, they're worried it signals a new, more fee-heavy direction for Patreon, even if they're not personally affected. Patreon, meanwhile, argues that this will help it become profitable, while offering different features to campaigns of vastly different sizes. Either way, creators will get a better deal on Patreon if they sign up now. Hurry. So this is interesting. So Patreon, again, in an effort to position itself as something completely different than what it sold itself as for all of these years, to, I think, attract venture capitalists, They did a series of podcasts and articles on TechCrunch. Okay, so they're talking about what Patreon is, how it's evolved, and where it's going to go. And it says Patreon has evolved in 3 stages, which was this initial crowdfunding platform. And then they evolved beyond that to try and be a destination platform for consumers, where there would be great content that you just go to Patreon to find, and you discover creators, kind of a marketplace model. This is kind of what we were sold on when we did our webcomic. Patreon came to us and said, oh, yeah, we're going to, kind of cross-promote we're going to cross promote, campaigns, which would have actually been pretty cool if you were backing a person. Then maybe on the side they had some ads that said, well, if you like, this person, this other person has like an audience overlap, maybe you want to check their stuff out too. They never really did that. They never really did it. You basically, Patreon always depended on you bringing your audience to them and them taking a cut. And, that just doesn't work. So they moved away from that. That was somewhat of a gradual shift. And essentially the decision was, it's not good to be stuck in this game of trying to be yet another destination platform for consumers competing with YouTube and Instagram and every single media site out there. Really, the opportunity and mission underlies our work. It's about helping creators. That's all about you. Enabling all these independent creators to sustain themselves and build thriving businesses. Very few people have a thriving business on Patreon. Very few people. They shifted and they now describe themselves as an SaaS company. That is software as a service. Okay, so we're going to get into this and what this means and why this is problematic, especially since they're sort of dictating who can and cannot use the platform based on their behavior outside of the platform itself. So they're software as a service company, which is very different from framing yourself as a consumer destination. Absolutely. The long and short of it is they see this opportunity, which is a growing market of independent creators around the world who are building fan bases, and for that particular type of SMB, they want to provide essentially the full suite of tools and services they need to run their businesses. So Patreon wants to be like QuickBooks, like the QuickBooks of... I'm not quite understanding what they want to do. Now, Patreon was originally started by a YouTuber to help YouTubers monetize beyond advertising, because at that point, some videos could not be monetized. The ad rates were kind of dropping. And if you depended solely on ad revenue, you probably weren't going to make a whole lot, or at least smaller YouTubers weren't going to make a whole lot of money. So they've gone away from that to, there really is no purpose now, because now YouTube does it themselves, and it's actually pretty cool. So I don't know what Patreon's thinking. I don't think this is going to work. I think they're overreaching. They're trying to be like a suite of business application. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. They can use other tools that aren't going to charge them 12% or $300 a month or whatever the hell it is to run their business. Really, you just have to be able to take payments through something like PayPal. And this kind of comes back to what we decided to do. Now, we never really pushed Patreon too hard because we really weren't sure where we were going to go with it. But we did, kind of set. People did ask about supporting us, and thank you to those of you who have. We're gonna, figure out where we're going. Like, we want to do like a Clownfish TV Plus, and I'm not exactly sure where we're gonna go with that. That's something that maybe we'll let the supporters decide. Like, what would you like to see? If you support Clownfish TV, what would be like an extra perk? Because right now we make videos as we have time to make them. This is far from a full-time job for us, but we would like to spend more time making videos, making more content, making comics, making animation, and this is a way to help us do that. But yeah, so we started the club, and then because at the time we didn't have a join button, but now we have this join button. So again, everything that Patreon sort of offered YouTubers, you can do it right through YouTube, and it just comes as like one payment. And you can, send so if your platform is primarily, now everybody doesn't have this, obviously. If you're doing, cartoons or whatever, you're not going to have access to this. Not all YouTubers have access to the join button. It's something they give you once you hit, I don't know what the threshold is. I thought it was 10,000 or 25,000 subs. I think it seems very arbitrary because some people have it and some people don't. There are people that actually have more subs than we do that don't have it. So I'm not really sure what the criteria is for it, but I'd rather, if our audience is on YouTube, be able to give them content directly through YouTube, either videos or live streams or posts. We could do artwork or whatever. We can do it right through YouTube because that's where everybody is, right? So I don't know, we're just brainstorming some ideas, but again, this right here, and they're doing it on Twitch and they're doing it on other platforms, it really sort of takes away any need for Patreon. Like, I don't even know what Patreon's for. I really don't know what Patreon's for at this point. And again, this is something you can do yourself through your website. We set this up. You can do different PayPal tiers. If you're a cartoonist and you want to do it that way, you do not need Patreon. And I would actually tell artists and YouTubers and podcasters, musicians, not to use Patreon now because it's in a really iffy place. I don't think Patreon is going to be around long term, or it's going to transition into something that's not really friendly for artists, for small creators. I think they might wind up going more corporate and working just with bigger creators because that's where most of the money is. But between that, them transitioning into something else, their CEO saying they're not sustainable, and them, going out there and just sort of randomly kicking people off the platform based on things they've said on other platforms, I can't recommend Patreon anymore. And their fees are going up too. I cannot recommend them anymore. You're going to be doing all the work, pushing your audience to Patreon when there are other better options out there. So if you are making stuff, just be aware, this is not, you do not have to use Patreon. There are better options out there, and I really question whether or not they're going to be around in another 5 years. So we'll keep on top of the Patreon situation here on Clownfish TV. It's been interesting to watch them sort of rise and fall in the fashion that they have. And, creators, they have a hard enough time, monetizing their work. And I just really think that Patreon is going to be more of an impediment at this point. I would build up something that, you have control of, like your website or a PayPal link or something. Anyway, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, rants, gaming videos, art videos, and more here on Clownfish TV. This has been Neon. We'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.